welcome to the Morgan Library. My name is Miss Lindsay, and welcome to another Teen Talk Tuesday. Now, the book I'll be reading today is called A Thousand Heartbeats by Kiera. History divides them. Fate unites them. Will love keep them together? Let's find out. Part 1. At the same time that Annika was reaching to feel her sword in its hiding place beneath her bed, Lennox was wiping blood from his. Lennox surveyed the hillside, catching his breath. 3 more souls to add to the tally. He'd long stopped counting. With all the lives lost at the tip of his sword, no one in the Dahrainian army could challenge his authority. Annika, on the other hand, had drawn blood only once, and it was purely accidental. All the same, there were few who could challenge her authority either. The marked difference was that those who could, did. Annika stood carefully, her legs still ever so slightly sore. She practiced her steps until she could move as gracefully as she was used to. And by the time her maid walked in, they both agreed her gait was passable. She sat at her vanity, her eyes looking at the edge of her bed reflected in the mirror. Her sword, hidden under her bed, would have to wait another day or two. But she was thrilled at the possibility of shattering one of the few rules she was still capable of breaking. Lennox, meanwhile, sheathed his sword and strode down the quiet hillside. K1 would be pleased with his update. Wanting to keep his situation as secure as he could, he made sure to never give him a reason to be displeased. When this war was over, if it ever even started, an entire kingdom would be forced into submission, and Lennox would have his heel on the neck of it. Annika and Lennox both focused on their upcoming day, unaware that the other existed, and blind to how they would change the trajectory of each other's lives, or how they irrevocably already did. Lennox. I walked back to the castle, trying to decide where to stop first, my quarters or the mess hall. I looked down at my coat and boots, wiping at my cheek. The back of my hand came away with traces of dirt, sweat, and blood, and I could see splatters of all 3 across my shirt as well. I'd go by the mess hall then. Let everyone see. I headed towards the eastern side entrance, which was the least tended area of Vocino Castle. To be fair, the rest of it wasn't much better. For lack of a better term, Vocino was a hand-me-down, left deserted by some forgotten kingdom and claimed as our home. Minimal effort was given to its maintenance. After all, it was only meant to be temporary. As I walked in, I saw K1 sitting at the head table. As usual, my mother was by his side. No one ever joined them. Even I'd never been presented with an invitation. The rest of the army sat as they pleased, mixing among unofficial ranks. I drew attention the moment I entered, strolling coolly up the center aisle, my wrist resting on the hilt of my sword. Conversations dropped to whispers as people craned their necks to get a better view. My mother noticed me first, her powdered blue eyes looking over me in a scowl. When people joined our ranks, finery and gowns were abandoned for a uniform of sorts, and most people were left with very little in the way of personal items. Mother reaped the benefits of this. She came down to eat daily in dresses once worn by someone else in the castle. The only woman in Vocino Castle afforded such privilege. To her right, K1's face was covered by the goblet he was drinking from. He slammed it on the table, wiping his weary beard with the back of his already dirty sleeve. With a heavy sigh, he settled his eyes on mine. "What is this?" he asked, motioning to my blood-stained clothing. "We had 3 attempted deserters this morning," I informed him. "You might want to send carts for the bodies before the wolves start scavenging." "Is that all?" K1 asked. "Is that all?" No, it wasn't all. It was the most recent act in a string in a string of deeds done for the sake of our people, done in K1's name, done to prove myself. And here I was, standing silent and dressed in blood, waiting for him to finally acknowledge me. I stood my ground, demanding he take note. I think it fairly impressive to single-handedly subdue 3 young, well-trained recruits in the dark of night, to guard the secrecy of both our location and intentions, and come out on the other side without a scratch. But I could be wrong. You often are, he grumbled. Trista, tell your son to calm down. My eyes flickered to my mother, but she remained silent. I knew he was baiting me. It was one of his favorite pastimes. And still, I was very close to taking a bite. I was saved by a commotion in the hallway. Make way! Make way! A boy shouted, running into the room. A shout like that meant one thing. The most recent commission was over, and our troops had returned. I turned around and watched as Aldrich and his lackeys strolled into the mess hall, each of them pulling 2 cows behind them. K1 let out a low chuckle, and I stepped to the side as my moment was eclipsed. Aldrich was everything K1 was looking for. Broad shoulders and a bendable will. His messy brown hair flopped forward over his forehead as he knelt down in the same place I'd just been standing. Behind him were 2 other soldiers, one he'd specifically chosen to go with him for his commission. They were covered in red mud, and one of them was shirtless. I crossed my arms, taking in the scene. 6 cows in the mess hall. He could have left them outside, but Aldrich clearly knew that this was by far the biggest and best conquest of one of these missions was produced. The worst, a body in a burlap bag. Mighty K1, I have brought back 6 cattle for the Dahrainian army. I submit my offering before you, hoping it proves my loyalty and worthiness, Aldrich said with his head bent low. Several people applauded, grateful for resources, as if this would be enough to feed even a fraction of us. K1 stood and walked over, inspecting the cows. Once he was done, he slapped Aldrich on the shoulder and turned to the crowd. What say you? Does this offering please you? Yes, everyone shouted. Well, almost everyone. K1 let out a guttural laugh. I agree. Arise, Aldrich. You have served your people well. Applause rang out, and the crowd converged around Aldrich and his team. I used the opportunity to duck away. I could only shake my head, wondering who he'd stolen them from. I was about to mentally chastise him for being so proud of himself, but when I looked at my shirt and reminded myself exactly who I was, I let it go. It was just a job, and now my job was done, and I was going to sleep for a bit. Well, if the only woman I cared for in this castle would allow that. I opened my door, and Thistle started yipping immediately. I chuckled. I know. I walked over to my sloppily made bed, scruffing the fur on the back of her head. I found Thistle when she was just a kid. She'd been injured. It seems her pack had left her. If anyone understood that, it was me. Gray foxes were typically nocturnal, a fact I'd learned the hard way, but she always perked up when they came in. She flopped back on the bed, showing me her stomach. I scratched her and then moved the planks from in front of the window. Sorry, I told her. I just didn't want you to see me with a sword. Not like that. You can run off now if you want. She stayed on the bed as I looked at myself in the small broken mirror on my desk. It was worse than I thought. Dirt was smeared across my forehead and blood was spattered across my cheek. I took a deep breath and dipped a towel in my basin of water, wiping away everything I'd done. Thistle was now pacing back and forth on my bed, looking at me with what I could have sworn were concerned eyes. Gray foxes were in the canine family. She had the senses of a wolf, and I had no doubt she could smell everything on me right now. I had a feeling she knew exactly the type of person I was and just what I'd done, but she was free to come and go, and she always came back. So I hoped she didn't hold it against me. It didn't matter either way. I held it against me. Annika. Here, my lady, Noemi said as she pinned the front of my dress to my stomacher. This is the last one. She bit her lip, looking like she was debating something. I tried to give her my most reassuring smile. Whatever it is, just say it. Since when are there secrets between you and I? She nervously touched her dark curls. It's not a secret, my lady. I was just wondering if you're ready to see him again. To see anyone again. Noemi chewed her lip. It was one of her many endearing habits. I shook her hand. Founding Day is tomorrow. The people need to see their princess as well. My presence at court encourages our countrymen, and that is my primary role. I ducked my head. If Noemi had been my real sister, she might have argued with me. As my maid, she simply replied, "Very well." With my hair brushed and dress set, Noemi slipped me into my sturdiest shoes, and I headed out. Though I had lived here my entire life, I was still in awe of Mekanoa Castle. With its wide open windows, vast marble floors, and an array of galleries. But above all, Mekanoa's beauty, it was home. My mother and father had foregone a church wedding in favor of exchanging their vows in the field outside. I was born here. My first words, first steps, first everything happened for me here. I was so proud of it all, so in love with this palace and this land. There was very little I wouldn't do for it. Indeed, there was apparently nothing I wouldn't do for Kiera. I walked slowly towards the dining hall. As I approached the door, I paused. Maybe Noemi was right. Maybe it was too soon. But I'd been seen, and now it was too late. Escalus noticed me before my father did, and he stood quickly, coming across the hall to greet me. The first real smile I'd had in weeks spread across my face as he embraced me. "I've been aching to see you, but Noemi said you weren't up for company," he said quietly. He reached up, brushing a lock of hair from his face. Escalus and I had both been gifted our mother Evelina's ashy brown hair and her warm brown eyes. But there was no mistaking that it was Escalus who was the echo of Theron Vedant. It was dull, I assure you, nothing but me sighing about my state. Besides, I'm sure you had much more important things to tend to. I tried to sound breezy, but I sensed it was failing. "You look different," he said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I shrugged. "I feel different." He swallowed hard. "Is it all settled then?" I nodded and lowered my voice. "It's all left to Father's timing now." "Come and eat. There's no sour cinnamon cannot fix." I giggled as we walked, thinking of our mother's words. She had many cures for what ailed the soul. Sunshine, music, cinnamon. But my laugh was short-lived as I came around to the other side of the table, curtsying to my father. Who was he going to be today? "Your Majesty," I greeted him. "Annika, glad to see you're well again," he said poignantly. In 7 words, I knew the darkness that sometimes descended on his mind was low and thick today. Downhearted, I took my place on his left and gazed out upon the courtiers quietly eating their breakfasts. It was musical in a way, the forks and knives tinging against the china plates, making chimes among the low thrum of voices. The light fell in sheets through the arched windows, and it looked like the morning was promising us a beautiful day. "Now that you're up and about, we need to discuss some business," my father began. "Founding Day is tomorrow, so Nicholas will be arriving tonight. I thought it would give you an excellent opportunity to propose." "Tonight?" I'd made my peace with the decision as best as I could, but I thought I'd have more time. "How did you even know that I would return to the court today?" "I didn't. But it needed to happen either way. He rarely comes to court without cause, and sooner is better than later. You can ask him after dinner." Well, he tied all that up neatly. "And I have to ask?" Father shrugged. "Protocol. You outrank him." His narrow eyes were on me. He was still angry at me for standing up to him. "And you have a stouter disposition than we ever knew. So I don't see you fainting at the idea of taking the lead." I wanted to scream at him, to plead for my sweet father to come back to me. There was a man behind those eyes who understood me, who saw my mother in my face. And I missed him so much that I was doing everything I could not to despise this man. But I was still my mother's daughter. For her sake, I kept my smile on my face, determined to preserve what was left of our family. "No, my lord, it won't be a problem." "Good." He turned back to his meal. Escalus was true to his word. Cinnamon breads with icing were sitting right within arm's reach. As tempting as they were, I completely lost my appetite. And that was chapters 1 of Annika and Lennox's story in Kiera Cass's 1,000 Heartbeats. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.